All right, let's get right into it. Protests are absolutely exploding across Iran. The US president has promised support, and the whole region feels like it's about to boil over. But that promise? It leads to a really big question, and that's what we're going to unpack today. So, President Trump told the people of Iran loud and clear that help is on its way. But as the situation on the ground gets more and more desperate, where is that help? Why hasn't it shown up? The answer, well, it starts with what's actually happening on the streets of Iran. You know, we're not talking about a small protest here. This is a massive movement. Hundreds of thousands of people all across the country are in the streets, and their demand is simple. They want the ruling clerics out. It was this incredible popular uprising that got that promise of support from Washington in the first place. And that message, it went everywhere. It really made it seem like direct American intervention wasn't just a possibility, but that it was coming soon. But as the protesters faced an absolutely brutal response from their own government, that promised help was nowhere to be found. The Iranian regime's reaction was, well, it was incredibly fast and unbelievably harsh. They basically moved to cut the protesters off from the rest of the world and just crush the movement with pure, overwhelming force. Their strategy had a few key parts. First, create an information blackout. They just cut off the internet. When Elon Musk tried to help by activating Starlink, the regime reportedly just jammed the signal. Then came the physical force. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, hit the streets, and reports started flooding out about mass shootings of civilians. And get this, according to the IRGC itself, this is the official number of protesters they've killed, nearly 3,000. But you have to understand, that number is just one piece of a much, much darker story. Yeah, this really shows you the information war that's at the heart of this crisis. While the regime is claiming under 3,000 deaths, you have watchdog groups saying the real number could be over 12,000, maybe even higher. The true scale of what's happening is being deliberately hidden. While all this was going on, the messages coming out of Washington just made everything more confusing. You had that initial promise of help, but then it was followed by statements that seemed to ramp things up and calm things down, all at the same time. So this was the first message, and it was really aggressive. That language, take over your institutions. A lot of people saw that as a direct call for revolution, and they figured it had to be backed by the promise of US military support. There were even reports that the Pentagon was drawing up options for a strike. But then the tone changed. This follow-up statement seemed to walk back the idea of an immediate military strike. Suddenly the emphasis was on different forms of help, specifically economic help. So what was it going to be? A military intervention or just more sanctions? The world was watching and nobody had a clue. All this uncertainty put the entire Middle East on a razor's edge. All the neighboring countries and other global powers, they started getting ready for the absolute worst-case scenario, a major military conflict. The international reaction was pretty telling. You saw this wave of countries, the US, Canada, the UK, France, Germany, and a whole bunch more, issuing these urgent warnings for their citizens to get out of Iran immediately. That's a classic sign that governments think a real conflict is a serious possibility. And of course, the key players in the region started mobilizing. The Israeli Defense Forces went on high alert for what they called possible surprise scenarios from Iran. And at the same exact time, Iran's IRGC announced they were on their highest level of alert, and they made a big point of saying their missile stockpile had gotten bigger. A very clear threat. So if the US made this big promise and the entire region is bracing for a fight, what's the holdup? Well, leaked reports are suggesting the real answer isn't in Washington or in Tehran, but in the capitals of America's own allies in the region. It turns out that, behind the scenes, there's this quiet effort from a group of Arab nations and Israeli officials who are all reportedly telling the White House to wait, to hold off on any military action. But here's the crucial part. They're not all doing it for the same reason. There are basically two different arguments being made here. According to a Wall Street Journal report, you've got one group, the Saudis, Qatar, Oman, and they're worried about the economic hit. They're afraid a strike would shock the oil markets. But then a separate NBC News report points to another group of Israeli and Arab officials who have a totally different, more strategic concern. They think a strike now would be too soon. They're arguing that the regime is not yet weakened enough for a strike to actually topple it for good. So while governments and military strategists are debating things like oil prices and timing, the situation for the Iranian people is still a matter of life and death. with the fate of actual individual people just hanging in the balance. And this isn't some abstract geopolitical game, right? The real cost of this crisis is measured in human lives. One story that's really grabs the world's attention is that of a 26-year-old protester named Yuran Sultai. When the president was asked about reports that Yuran Sultani was about to be executed, his response was incredibly direct and very personal. He basically drew a red line, not around some military base, but around a single human life. He said that if that execution happens, the US will take very strong action. That just shows you how fast one single event could cause this whole thing to escalate. So what we have is this delay caused by a really complex mix of economic fears and cold, hard strategic calculations from US allies. But with a single execution that could act as the trigger and thousands of lives already lost, the pressure to do something is absolutely immense. The question now isn't really if the situation will change, but how and when.